give you a peek behind the curtain, Chatter That Matters. I do my own research, and I really like to have directional questions and a sense of where I want this interview to go. Wearing my listener's shoes, I always think about head, heart, and hands. Is this subject matter going to be interesting emotionally? Is it going to touch a chord? Are there some ideas and that my listener can action, that I can action as I go about my life? But there's times where we go completely off script. The game plan is thrown out almost immediately. And trying to keep my emotions in check becomes very difficult because I, in fact, am so moved. And that's my interview today with Glyn Lewis. He's the visionary behind Renewal Development.
So we tear down 600 really nice homes every year. To me, that seems incredibly wasteful. It's wasteful from a material perspective. It's wasteful from an embodied carbon perspective. It's wasteful from a housing perspective. Those are good homes that someone could be living in.
He's turning a wrecking ball into a tool for sustainability. He's saving beautiful homes that were going to be demolished just because they're in the way of development and repurposing them into communities that need housing. And they don't just get affordable housing, they get the gift of a beautiful house. And the emotions that poured through my veins when I was talking to him, the admiration I have for him for finding this purpose and pursuit, the gratitude he has for his mentors, including his younger sister, his mother, his comprehension of what it takes to both dream and do, his knowledge of philosophy and psychology.
Being a disruptor, being truly innovative to transform something to hopefully a better place is incredibly challenging.
Well, all of that ladders into one beautiful tale of an entrepreneur who's in a constant conversation with both Mother Nature and human nature. Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. And with that introduction, Glyn Lewis, I'd like to welcome you to Chatter That Matters.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So my show is about people that overcome circumstances, they chase dreams, they change their world and ours for the better. I walk by a house that deserves to be torn down 100 times and I just see a house that's about to be torn down. You saw this as an opportunity to not only create a business, but as you call it, as a campaign to save the planet. So I want to know a little bit more about you before we get into the business. Where did this son of mine come from? Talk to me about your upbringing.
I think it was Shakespeare who said the past is prologue. And to understand where you're going, you really have to understand where you've come from. I grew up here in Metro Vancouver, went to Simon Fraser University. I signed up as a chemistry major. I thought I wanted to be a chemistry educator, actually. I had some really great teachers when I was in high school, and I just thought that was going to be my contribution, was to kind of mentor and guide. Something interesting about the science is that, it's a fair amount of curiosity. You're kind of trying to understand the world and you're trying to understand how things work and why they work the way they do. And I think that kind of reflects a little bit about my, alternative way of looking at problems is through that lens of curiosity and what ifs. So I was at SFU. I watched Inconvenient Truth, the Al Gore documentary about climate change. I guess that was around 2005, how unsustainable it felt to keep developing our communities and our global economy the way that it was, especially if you look at population growth and you look at all these different factors adding up together to have this incredible impact on the Earth's ability to sustain life. But I kind of felt like we knew what a lot of the problems were, and it wasn't so much about defining the problem as it was about coming up with creative solutions. And so I ended up actually shifting my degree to this thing called sustainable community development. I did my thesis with this Dr. Mark Rosalind. He wrote this book called Towards Sustainable Communities. It's a seminal book. It's used around the world now. And that course was kind of my blueprint for thinking through how do we build our communities differently? How do we build our economies differently? How do we plan our neighborhoods differently? I ended up working in politics for a while. I went down to the United States. I worked there for a year. I came back and I worked in politics here in Canada, both at the federal level and provincial level and local level. Ended up starting a company that built software to help enable political campaigns and political movements. I was working in the nonprofit sector a bit too. And then a few years later, what happened, Tony, was my sister was living in this really charming 1920, 1930 home in a Esquimalt. She took really good care of the home and they were renovating it. And it was such a beautiful, charming, big bay windows and the high vaulted ceilings and all that kind of stuff. And a developer bought the whole city block to do what's called a land assembly. So to add density, and we're seeing this happen hundreds, if not thousands of times all across Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and some other growing urban areas where you're seeing a lot of these single family homes being gobbled up into land assemblies and being slated for demolition to make space for higher density development. And so when my sister's house was purchased in this land assembly by this developer in Esquimalt, she, being a bit of an environmentalist herself, just thought this was a terrible idea. And she said, no, I don't want to let just this home go to the landfill. So she ended up working with a contractor who lifted the home and put it on a truck and moved it north of Souk. And she moved it there with her partner, and then they repurposed it. Tony, when my sister did this, it just awakened in me this wow, what a brilliant model, right? It's housing, it's more affordable housing, it's more sustainable housing, and there's all of these great homes being demolished. Why doesn't more of this happen?
I want to unpack a lot of that. I guess the first question is, you're in this white lab coat and you're doing everything you thought you wanted to do. You make a big course correction when you start focusing on the environment. And then the next course correction is saying, I don't want to be in this lab coat anymore. And I'm curious, was that an individual that touched you in a certain way? Or was it just simply the Al Gore film and book? Or do you think this was something that was always in you, that there was a greater calling than a classroom, that your calling was going to be a community or broader?
I'm a big believer that we have certain innate capabilities and skills and talents. At a certain point, you might hit a ceiling. And I think that within the lab environment, I saw a limitation of what I'm capable of, or what I'm interested in, and what I can do using this space. And I just felt that there was more growth if I took a different pathway. And the different pathway was to say, okay, great, we know what the problems are, but I really want to work on the solutions.
And then my second question, because when you go into politics, it really is a profession of influence versus authority. Going into there, did you feel that was also limiting in the sense that there was a lot of consensus and a lot of collaboration and maybe a first gear where you were wired more for saying, I want to have my hand on that stick shift and I want to choose the gears?
When I was working in politics, it's such a machine, right? And there's different people play different roles, and it's huge and it can be very bureaucratic. And you have to work really hard for a really long time to build enough power internally of that structure to really have latitude, to have a fair amount of agency. All of the backbencher MLAs and MPs or the people who work on campaigns, it's like you're just part of something way bigger. But if you're someone like me who appreciates agency and having freedom and creative control and all of these things, that just wasn't the right forum for me to be fully expressed. And so being an entrepreneur, creating something where I can have complete creative control and leadership and guidance over, if I'm going to use the best of my talents and skills and capabilities, this was the right channel for me.
What advice can you give to young people to have the courage to look around at their circumstances and go, if this is a square peg in a round hole, it's okay to declare that and to find something else? Versus a lot of people, which I think get on this escalator that they think they're heading up, but as quickly as you did, or maybe a decade later, they realize they're really not moving.
The posters behind me are from Apple's Think Different campaign.
One of my favorite ads of all time.
So the ethos that Steve Jobs brought to Apple and what he saw and envisioned Apple's role in the world was, and which I thought was so perfectly summarized in the Think Different campaign, right? The square pegs and the round holes. Here's to the crazy ones, the ones who've envisioned a different world and are willing to fully commit themselves to creating that world in their own way differently. And we all benefit from that through innovation and creativity break down old barriers and trying to force change onto industries or force change onto established norms. And it's incredibly hard, Tony. And I'm sure from a lot of the folks that you've probably talked to in the work that you've done in your life, being a disruptor, being truly innovative to transform something to hopefully a better place is incredibly challenging. But, Newton's, I think it was his first, being a scientist, Newton's first law of thermodynamics, an object at rest has a tendency to remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. You have to put the force together. And that could be creative force, it could be spiritual force, it could be emotional force, enterprise force. You have to mass that to try to drive change onto something that doesn't want to change. And inherently, and physics and the natural world shows us that things don't want to naturally change. It takes a certain amount of courage and boldness to try to envision what you want your own life to be about, to create the role that you want to. It could be in your relationships, it could be within your family, it could be within your career, it could be within whatever domain it is. It's about just not falling into the pattern. It's not about falling into the stream just because the stream is moving in this direction, charting that new different course or the way that feels right for you and having the courage to lean into that.
It's funny. I always talk about it as the invisible bars at the status quo, and we never realize that we're holding on to them. I always wonder when I talk to young people, is it a comfort level? Is it validation because this is what your parents wanted you to do? Is it just, I've decided that in my life I'm going to work to live versus choose a path in life that also gives me life? So great philosophy. Your sister, is she older or younger?
She's 2 years younger.
Her desire to save this house, there must have been an awful lot of people that said to her, this is not a smart decision.
Something I've always known about her is that she doesn't accept the status quo. And if she thinks something is broken, she will fight to change it. And I think it's that quality that I admire, often to her own detriment. When I saw her do this project, it just fit within what I knew about her to be true. She's always going to be that person to pick the hard fight, to do the right thing.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo.
You talk about here's the crazy ones. If you had to pick between you and her to be in that ad, who would have deserved it more?
I think she has more vision than I do. I think I have more of the strategy about what needs to happen to get to that point.
While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius.
I listened to one of the interviews you did, and you talked about a teacher in your life, this Yoda that touched you and made you realize there was more to you than you thought even met your eye. Who was that teacher?
My chemistry grade 12 teacher. A little bit about me going in high school is I wasn't a great student. In fact, I struggled a fair bit. I think I had my own learning challenges and motivation challenges, and I almost failed grade 11 chemistry. In the summer of grade 11 going to grade 12, I kind of had to sit down with myself and I just said, what is this life going to be about, Glyn? If you really want to do something here, you're going to have to sit down and really apply yourself and focus. And so I came back that September, Tony, guns a-blazing. And my teachers did not recognize me. I ended up with the second highest grade in chemistry in grade 12 in our school. So a big part of it was just that fundamental mind shift and approach that I had to take. But also I had a great teacher. I had this great Mr. Pong. He encouraged and he was supportive. And he was just one of those teachers that you want to have in your life, that someone comes along and says, I believe in you, even when you might not believe in yourself.
So you and your sister, I have to believe you weren't the easiest kids just because of your appetite for life. But how did your parents, did they encourage that? What I always say to parents sometimes is when you have these people with an appetite for life, don't starve it, feed it.
A bit of backstory is that my dad was sixth generation Canadian. His mother was Russian. They were Doukhobors. And my mom was Greek. And so she had this entire different worldview than my dad did. Born in Athens, and she grew up in Europe. And I think my mom really had this perspective of the world's your oyster. And if you work hard and if you fight for what you believe in, Glyn, anything and everything is possible. For us to keep leaning into everything that we wanted to do. So when my sister took on the fights that she did, when I'm trying to build Renewal Development and do the work that we do, we're constantly coming up against opposition and resistance. And you have to kind of have this innate belief that it's possible to get through it.
Coming up is much more than just my 3 takeaways with Glyn Lewis. We have an honest conversation about whether his model, his vision of instead discarding our past because it gets in the way of progress can in fact be repurposed so that it helps others get on the way to their future. And then I'll have Leah Robinson, who's been on the show before. She's the VP of Home Equity Financing at RBC, to talk about the work RBC is doing to make homeownership more affordable. Hi, it's Tony Chapman from Chatter That Matters. RBC is offering more financing options to support Canadian homeowners looking to maximize their property's potential. Whether you want to provide supportive housing for a family member or supplement your income with a rental, RBC's Construction Mortgage Multi-Units program has you covered. You can finance additions like laneway homes, garden suites, modular units, or even redevelop your home into duplexes or triplexes. Speak to an RBC mortgage specialist today to see how this program can work for you. Maximizing the potential of your home? Well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
We are one of the only companies, if not the only company, structured the way we are in North America. The demolition, the moving, and the repurposing all integrated into one company. And as far as I know, no other company is structured like us. It's not only just building your own team. It's not only just being a CEO and the culture and having the right people and training them up. It's also externally how dynamic and innovative and disruptive our business model is, and how challenging it is.
Today, my special guest is Glyn Lewis. He's a crusader, he's a change maker, he's transformative, he believes in a better Canada, and for all the above, I believe in him. So talk to me about Renewal Development, because this business makes complete sense for humanity and the planet. But I have to believe you must have hit so many walls of resistance, because to some, you're a deterrent. I just want to land grab and build. I just want to get on with my business. So tell me about the business and how you fashioned it in a way that it was worth your effort to see this thing happen. Because I got to believe in the early days, it wasn't easy.
It's gotten easier over the years. It feels like pushing a huge boulder up a hill. And you're going to hit these bumps, and all of a sudden it slow down, and sometimes you feel like you have a little bit of momentum, and then all of a sudden, now you feel like you're losing momentum, and doors open. Sometimes a lot of doors close. I think what a huge part of the motivation for me is that I believe in it so firmly, right? And you kind of have to. You wouldn't do this unless you really believed in in the sustainability part of this, the raising the consciousness part of this, the affordability part of this. I often say that renewal is a campaign disguised as a company.
So talk to me about Renewal Development. If I, the classic Dragon's Den pitch, that everybody's so fascinated, like everybody wants things snackable and in a soundbite.
Right.
The snackable soundbite, it sort of gets me excited about what you're doing.
We look for homes slated for demolition. And every year, there's about 3,000 single-family homes slated for demolition across Metro Vancouver. Every year, 3,000. And that's as a result of all of this push for density. It's all of this push for more housing. We hear it from the provincial government, the federal government, the local government. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. And so a huge part of the solution that's being promoted is just to build more housing. Now, in a landlocked area like Metro Vancouver or Greater Victoria, you're only going to be able to sprawl out so far. And so now the push is to build upwards, to densify. So to densify, these developers are buying up all of these single family homes to do land assemblies. What I do is I try to find the good ones. They could be mid-century homes. They could be character homes. They could be homes built in the last 5 or 10 years. 20% of the 3,000 homes torn down every year are actually really nice, good condition, high value homes. So we tear down 600 really nice homes every year. To me, that seems incredibly wasteful. It's wasteful from a material perspective. It's wasteful from an embodied carbon perspective. It's wasteful from a housing perspective. Those are good homes that someone could be living in. And on the flip side, we have a housing crisis in so many of these non-urban communities. We essentially provide a demolition service, a sustainable demolition service to these developers. We lift them, we put them on trucks, often we put them on barges, we take them to non-urban communities, and then we repurpose them. So I'm essentially a general contractor, but instead of going down to Home Depot and buying all the lumber new and all of the copper new and all of that stuff, I'm trying to maximize what already exists.
You describe when people are trying to challenge your vision as sort of a dragon, the dragons that are in the way. So tell the audience what kind of dragons are sort of breathing fire on what I love is this approach is the ultimate recycling, the 3 R's, but you're happy to be doing it with 2,000 or 3,000 square feet versus a Pepsi can.
And it's interesting, the metaphor of a dragon, because it's very literal and you can see it. And some of them are much more subtle than something that's trying to literally fight you from getting through the passage. The demolition industry. So I'm currently trying to bring a paradigm shift into an industry that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, which is you've got something, you don't want it there, you smash it up and you send it into a landfill. They own excavators. And they own a lot of the trucks to haul the materials. And sometimes they own the transfer stations. So they've got these entire business models built around demolition. So I come along and I say, I think there's a more responsible way to do this. And that is to recycle the good homes and then to recycle the materials that we can't demolish. And so they're kind of a dragon. I try not to see them as such a fierce competitors. In some ways, we could probably work together. In some ways, I hope that they amend their business model. But I think that we're going to force change on that industry. The other challenge and resistance points that we have in front of us are just developers who aren't familiar with this model. Those developers know demolition. So now I come along, I meet them in their boardroom. We'll demolish and recycle the homes that we can't move, but I'm going to move a couple of the good homes. In of itself, that new model, that new process can put fear into people. It's that change because they're often so risk adverse. They're just going to fall back to the thing that they know how to do, which is smash the building up and get going because all they really care about is building their project and selling their units and then moving on to their next project, right? So it's a mind shift change.
When do you know you're that chemistry teacher that impacted you when you finally connect with a developer who not only feels I'll give you a chance, but this is the right thing to do, that they change their whole mindset, that they realize that demolition matters because it's not only what you take down, but what you do with it?
I had a great project with West Group. They're a huge developer here in Vancouver. I walked into their boardroom. I said, listen, you're doing a 60 home land assembly in Port Moody. We've driven through there. We think there's at least 10 really nice homes in there. This is the model. And to their credit, they're a big developer. It was a big project. They said, yeah, okay, let's do it. It generated so much media interest because Renewal ended up moving the 10 homes from Port Moody to the Sunshine Coast in partnership with the Shishal First Nation. So the nation received the 10 homes. My company general contracted the whole thing. We did some fix-ups. We did some renovations. We added basement suites. And so it's going to end up being 17 units of below-market rental housing for nation members. It generated a lot of interest. Well, first of all, West Group got a lot of great publicity and recognition, which I think they honestly deserved. The nation did too, for doing something so innovative and sustainable and a housing solution. But what it also did is it kind of prompted all of these other developers to kind of perk their ears up and say, wait a second, that's interesting. And so we ended up getting a whole bunch of phone calls after that. So I think these things do snowball out. And like I was mentioning, that pushing the boulder up the mountain. It's like you do it a few times, you prove that it works, you iron out the kinks, and it does in theory get easier.
When do you get bored of this and do something else? And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but as you start pushing these boulders up, does this ever start feeling like you're wearing a lab coat? I've figured out this model, much like your software company, and now I need to find a new tightrope to walk on? Or do you think that this is your calling and there's just going to be, the boulders will get bigger and the grade going to get steeper, and that's what's going to keep you inspired and motivated?
In politics, because I worked in the United States and I worked in Canada, people decide to run. Maybe they've been working towards it, and maybe they start off at a local level and then they go up to a state level or a provincial level. And every one of those rungs tests you. You're up against 5 or 10 or different people, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be sometimes cutthroat and challenging. And I've watched this with candidates who run for elected office. I've now experienced this building a really challenging business model, is that the fight and the challenge, if you can get through it and if you can survive, it strengthens your resolve. You get more locked in and you get more committed and you get stronger. And I've kind of felt that evolution in me over the last 5 years. You hit some huge roadblock. Someone says no to you. You can't move a home through there. And you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then you fight to overcome that challenge. You fight to get through that dragon. And then on the flip side of it, you come out stronger. You come out more confident. And this has happened to me probably at least 10 times already, Tony. I think it kind of strengthens you to take on bigger and bigger challenges and to take on bigger and bigger projects. It actually, I think, also carves a path for people behind you. Myself and other people who are in these kind of leading circular economy industries. We're leading paths for others to follow in our footsteps. So when do I get bored of this? I mean, one of my dreams is to create a whole community of relocated, repurposed homes somewhere here in coastal British Columbia. I'd love to do that. 75 to 150 homes. Master plan it, think about sustainability, think about community, rescue these homes. I think it'd be such a great thing. And I think after something like that, Tony, which might be 5-10 years away from actually realizing it and completing it, and there's going to be a bunch of stepping stones along the way. I think after that, something like that, I'll feel really good about what I've accomplished here. And hopefully we've shifted mindsets and we've shifted policy and we've shifted ways of thinking and ways of looking at a lot of these things about demolition and construction. Then I think I'll be ready for another challenge. I probably will need a break because this is exhausting. I love what we do for now, and I think I can see myself being in this for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
I always end my interviews with my 3 takeaways, and this interview went in such an extraordinary places, but this Newton law of the sense of inertia, unless there's external forces, to me is such a powerful metaphor of how life can just suddenly bring us into the status quo. And it's whether it was your chemistry teacher or in your case now, Glyn, walking into a boardroom and saying there's a different way, that when you put this external force on, especially one with such positivity and possibility, magic can happen. The second one is the way you described your mom as this sort of, I almost saw her as this 20s movie star, this coming from Greece and then Europe and then ending up in Canada, which I got to believe must have been such a change for her. You could take her out of the world, but you couldn't take the world out of her. And she blessed you with that. And I think that is so wonderful that this world is your oyster, I think was her way of saying, that's part of me and I'll never lose it. And you need to discover it so that you never lose it. The third one is like, you've almost described within you and your sister, Steve Jobs, the sense of his dream and vision of making technology transparent, the plug and play computer. Nobody cares about widgets. They just want 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then somebody that must have worked tirelessly that really said, to do so, you need to figure out how to. It's one thing to dream it, but it's another thing to do it. And I think that's probably the greatest lesson for people listening is you don't always have to be the dreamer. You don't always have to be the doer. But if you could put the two together, find that higher purpose, find that North Star and chase it, you'll have the strength to push those boulders up the hill. And I'm just thrilled I had a chance to spend some time with you today. And I know you've had a very busy day.
You've asked such perceptive questions, and I really appreciate the enthusiasm I've also heard in your own voice. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Joining me now is Leah Robinson. She's been on the show before. She's the Vice President of Home Equity Financing at RBC. Leah, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Tony, thanks for having me. I'm happy to join you today on this important topic.
In terms of getting banks to open their minds, this is a new way of looking at housing. It requires more innovation, more creativity from the bank's point of view. That's what you're doing at RBC. So I thought you could weigh in and talk more about, which isn't necessarily a skip in the park or an easy thing to sort of approve, but still requires the kind of thinking and creativity that you're willing to put into it.
Construction right off of the bat is not for the faint of heart. And I'll say that, I'll say that over and over because there certainly is challenges in terms of working through the process. But it's different ways of living. When you look at some of the supply challenges, we really have to look at this in many different ways. New buildings, yes, are great, but how do we reuse and recycle some of the existing infrastructure and modify it so that families and communities can live a bit differently? And that's where, we're looking at our programs saying, how do we support people who want to do this, who want to live in multi-generational homes or have the ability to generate additional income to be able to support a mortgage.
And so if I was in that situation saying, listen, I've got this house, maybe I want my mother-in-law to move in, or I want to find some rental income, is the process for approaching someone like RBC different because it isn't your, here's my down payment and here's how much I can afford in a house. This is something I own and want to do more with it.
Yeah, we certainly have programs both at if it's an existing property that you own or that you want to purchase. And it just depends as well in terms of how deep are you planning on going with that home. We do have those options for both kinds of clients, depending on what you want to do, whether it's multiple suites, whether it's putting in a single suite, adapting a space, for family members, whether they're seniors and they need special equipment, whatever it is.
Leah, part of this is not just the sort of doing the math, but it's the insecurity and uncertainty path that I haven't followed in the past. What is your advice?
Yeah, I think the first place to start is to really understand where you're living and what are the requirements there. But when you're ready to kind of go through that process and you said, this is a decision that makes sense for me, our mortgage specialists are best equipped to kind of have those discussions. Finding a qualified builder, I think, is also a really important piece of that process. Working with the municipality, what are the requirements in terms of permits? How do you go through that application process? And then the financing that you need to get through that.
What role can an organization like RBC play working with the city, two very different entities, to try to encourage this kind of sentiment so that people that do have the ability to dream and want to do find less friction and less bureaucracy and more people there saying, yes, let's do it together. We can make this happen.
It's really difficult right now. And so how can between a builder, a municipality, and a bank sort of come together and say, we kind of need to create a repeatable process? Because when people hear about how difficult it can be, it sort of pushes them away from that, right? And it creates that fear of taking something like a big project like that on. So, creating those opportunities is really about looking at what are the right partnerships and what are the experts that the average person needs around them in order to be able to accomplish something like doing a major renovation on their home, major reconstruction of their home in order to be able to accomplish their goals.
Leah, for all the things that you work on and manage, I have to believe that what you're doing here in terms of really helping people dream and do, find a way to get more from their property, whether that's more family living with them or more income, it's got to be some of the most rewarding work you're doing.
Absolutely. I've got personal stories in my own family, the difficulty in affordability, right? And so giving people the options to be able to adapt their spaces, right? And that allows them to, live in a different style of housing in a different neighborhood and things like that. So
I appreciate your time today and just looking forward to seeing what RBC is doing in this space and give you a standing ovation because fulfilling mortgages is repeatable. Doing something like this, each one of them is a bit of a one-off. And I just congratulate you for taking that on.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate it.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.